Hey guys, a really interesting story hit the news yesterday about Bill Barr, the Attorney General for the United States, investigating cannabis companies without cause. Cannabis overlap has politics overlap. I thought I'd give a little bit of a rundown of what happened. So this is 5 things about the news story that Attorney General Bill Barr ordered inappropriate investigations of cannabis companies. So number 1, who is Bill Barr? So Bill Barr is the Attorney General of the United States, a position that oversees all the prosecutors in the federal government. Now, it's understood when an Attorney General is appointed by a president, they're going to share some of the same views, some of the same priorities. But once you set those priorities, the way the law is applied needs to be fair for no matter who it is. Richard Nixon's Attorney General actually went to prison because he was interfering in investigations to try to cover up the Watergate scandal. Jeff Sessions, that everyone in the cannabis industry was worried about, but Jeff Sessions seemed to have an understanding of this apolitical nature. He refused to interfere in the Mueller investigation. Donald Trump yelled at him for literally years and is still harassing him on Twitter as of like 2 weeks ago. That brings us to number 2. What is this hearing exactly? Bill Barr has been doing a lot of very overt, very obvious interference. In the Roger Stone case, he interfered and made the prosecutors reduce the amount of time they wanted to sentence him to. Then, after Michael Flynn pled guilty not once but twice, Bill Barr interfered and said, we're just going to let this guy walk, we're going to drop the case entirely. After a couple of those really high-profile interferences, this committee hearing was scheduled. It's the House Judiciary Oversight Committee. It's their job to be a check and balance on the executive branch's Department of Justice. So this hearing is a check and a balance about whether Bill Barr is interfering in these cases. That's what the hearing was supposed to be about. Everybody was focused on the big cases that are making the news, like Donald Trump's close friends. Nobody thought that they were messing with the cannabis industry, but surprise, surprise, they were. Okay, so number 3, what exactly did Bill Barr do? What came out in this hearing that's making some of these headlines? Well, to examine that, we can actually look at some of the testimony directly, which is a really cool thing about C-SPAN and our open records democracy.
My name is John Elias, and I'm a career attorney with the Department of Justice.
Oh, and there's no editing here. The camera really did stay on the Democratic chairman as he fiddled with his mask for the first several sentences of this incredibly important testimony.
I joined the department in 2006, and over the past 14 years, I have served under 6 attorneys general and 3 presidents. I've spent my entire legal career at the department.
So this guy is the type of guy who's been working in the Justice Department for 14 years, which means he's a really straight-edge kind of guy, not the type of guy who generally goes out of his way to defend the cannabis industry.
Under Attorney General Barr were abuses of authority.
Okay, let's skip ahead a little bit. Let's jump to his actual testimony. Okay, so here's like kind of the overview context here. After companies report their proposed mergers, this guy explains the staff undertakes an individual examination to identify those most likely to violate the antitrust laws. Because antitrust laws are good for consumers when they're enforced correctly. A lot of people would argue they're not enforced well in America right now because we have a lot of companies with way too much power. But in theory, breaking up companies, making them smaller, or stopping them from merging with each other can help protect a competitive marketplace that is a big part of the American economy. John Elias explains here that staff assesses whether to perform no investigation, a brief investigation, or a full investigation. Then the witness explains how they decide whether to do further investigation and whether to do a second request subpoena. So he says it usually takes high market shares, typically double-digit market shares, to trigger the extended review process. Here he also makes clear that it's a pretty big deal to issue a second request. They're infrequent, he says, because they require companies to respond to burdensome administrative subpoenas. 15-page subpoenas or longer and produce hundreds of thousands or millions of documents. Okay, now we get to the cannabis industry.
In the first of the cannabis investigations, the merger of MedMen and PharmaCann, career attorneys examined the proposed deal and determined that the transaction called for no further antitrust review.
When they examined the transaction, they determined the cannabis industry appeared to be fragmented with many market participants in the states that had legalized the product. As a result, they viewed the transaction as unlikely to raise any significant concerns. So basically they're saying it doesn't really matter if these 2 companies merge because they are each fighting for market share with hundreds of competitors. They might have a decent foothold in this state, in this region, or that city. But in general, when the staff looked at the cannabis market, they said there's hundreds, there's thousands of players, there's new players every week. We don't really need to worry about this market. It's going to stay competitive for a while. Nobody's close to locking this up into a monopoly. However, on March 5th, 2019, Attorney General Barr called the division leadership to his office for a meeting entitled Marijuana Industry Merger Review. What a boring meeting title. At this meeting, Bill Barr rejected the analysis of career staff, and he ordered the Antitrust Division to issue second request subpoenas. He said, you're going to send a second request subpoena to this cannabis merger. I don't care if you think it's not important. I don't care if this market's fragmented. I don't care if it doesn't really threaten a monopoly. We're going to send them a second request because I said so. They're going to have to file millions of documents, hundreds of thousands of documents, and that's my call because I'm in charge of this department. Very unusual for an attorney general to do something like that. So what happened with that MedMen investigation? They eventually got 1.3 million documents from the files of 40 employees. 1.3 million divided by 40. So that means on average, each of those 40 employees contributed 32,000 documents to this investigation. If the government went and found 32,000 documents of yours from work, what would those even include? Slack messages, Giphies, text to your friend, telling your coworker that thank God it's Friday afternoon because you did a dab before this meeting and you can't wait till the week is over? That all ended up in this investigation. And 29% of all second requests in last year were about cannabis industry mergers. 29% across the whole U.S. economy. The division went on to conduct similar antitrust investigations of 9 other mergers in the cannabis industry. Staff continued to document at the outset of the investigations that the transaction appeared unlikely to raise significant competitive concerns, but that the division, meaning the political leadership, nonetheless had decided to proceed because it had not closely evaluated this industry before. This remained the rationale through the 10th investigation. So 10 different times they said, this is probably not likely to cause a problem for competition reasons, but we really haven't looked at the weed industry enough yet. 10 times they did that. And here is the ringer. The head of the Antitrust Division responded to internal concerns about these investigations at an all-staff meeting in September of last year. So the staff is like, we're supposed to be investigating the entire U.S. economy. How come 5 of the 8 projects we have going on in our entire division are worrying about these little tiny weed companies that can barely even hold a market share together? And here's what the Assistant Attorney General said. There, he acknowledged that the investigations were motivated by the fact that the cannabis industry is unpopular on the 5th floor. So on the 5th floor, the boss's floor, they don't like weed. So therefore, we're just going to investigate the hell out of them. No more reason than that. Here's what John Elias says.
But personal dislike of an industry is not a valid basis upon which to ground an antitrust investigation.
Oh, and yeah, still no editing. The camera really did catch a Republican congressman looking like he was ducking and hiding as the witness talks about Bill Barr's corruption. Here's another diversionary tactic the Republicans used earlier in the same hearing.
Official action, along with his continuing media project to make Americans believe that the FBI
can't hear this witness. This is a very important witness.
There's no rules about when you can make noise.
Okay, number 4. What was the impact on the cannabis industry? Well, basically, it created massive headaches for these companies as they were already trying to do something pretty complicated, merging their businesses in a heavily regulated industry while trying to figure out the difference between state law, federal law, all that. And then suddenly they turn around and they get this request for millions of documents. They got to compile all that. They got to pay lawyers to put it all together and send it to the Department of Justice. But there's dozens of cannabis industry executives out here who went through this. I expect to see articles quoting them saying like, yeah, we went through hell for this and we didn't know what it was all about. Now we find out Bill Barr just didn't like us because he doesn't like weed. What are they going to do about it? It's cannabis. You just shut up, you take what the government gives you, and you hope that 40 years from now we can get rid of this nonsense that pretends like a plant we grow from the ground is somehow a dangerous substance. So number 5 is, what's the impact on the United States? Well, first of all, we lose even more trust in our justice system. I mean, we all complain that things are corrupt, the system's broken, but we don't expect that friends of the president are allowed to commit crimes, or that if you're in an industry that the attorney general just personally doesn't like, that you're going to be subject to more investigations. We expect systemic corruption, but this has a little personal touch on it that's just not normal in American politics or American justice system. It's also just dangerous on what it says about what Bill Barr is willing to do. If he'll put his finger on the scale to make life harder for little tiny cannabis companies that don't really affect his life at all, what's he going to do to journalists who write articles critiquing the president or himself? What's he going to do to activists? What's he going to do with people on the other side of the political spectrum? Maybe they send an extra subpoena your way. Maybe they rack up your legal fees. Bill Barr has these little insidious ways that he reaches into the justice system and makes little small changes to make life more difficult for people he doesn't like, and that's what this story is about. He should be impeached, removed from office, and convicted of crimes. The president should be impeached for even having an attorney general doing that, but of course, that's not going to happen.
Marijuana.
So in real terms, it probably won't mean much, except that, God, we have to vote in November.